there is a quote-unquote best way to talk to your children about terrorism or the events of 9/11, but if a parent were to ask you that, what would you say?
Well, I think that terrorism is really no different from any other kind of brutality that plays out in the context of humanity. We put a label on it, but terrorists are people, and they're people who are hurt, and they're people who are angry, and they're people who are desperate. And there are a whole lot of angry, hurt, desperate people who don't, hijack airplanes. But they do other, sometimes large and sometimes microaggressions against fellow man. So I think that, I would say that it's important to be honest with kids about the fact that, here's this date, and people are talking about, September 11th, like it's something that's special, something to be remembered and held on to, and what is it that we're trying to hold on to in the context of that? I hope that it's what we're trying to hold on to is our memory of the humanity lost in that. There's always a cautionary note in it about what happens if we let ourselves go too far down a path of anger and hatred. And I think it's important that we not use it as an opportunity to divide the world into good people and bad people, because we've all got some of both in us, and it's how we know that about ourselves and how we manage that. So I think in talking to kids about it, you're two things. One thing I want to say in talking to kids about anything, the language of children is motion, and it is the primary processing mode. As they get older, they move a little more into that left hemispheric logical analytic model, but younger children, the language is emotion, and that means that when you talk to them about this, you need to reflect emotion, or it just becomes words, kind of like the Peanuts comic representation of the adults when they talk, it's wah, 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 wah. So if you want to sit down and talk to your kid about the fact that their community is remembering 9/11, then you show affect that represents the sadness of that. Say, I want to talk to you. You may have noticed that people are talking about 9/11. This is something I want you to understand, sweetie. This was a really difficult, sad moment, because many, many lives were lost in a way that was awful and frightening, and so we remember this day as a way of remembering those folks, and also helping remind us to not let ourselves go too far down the path in anger and hatred, and because it can lead to some pretty awful stuff that we sometimes call war, or we may call it terrorism, but it's all kind of the same. And so I think you talk to your kid pretty honestly, but you do bring a little bit of emotion into the story. If you look at a kindergarten teacher, I've had the good fortune of consulting to treatment programs over the years in many different settings, and some of them younger, and watching a teacher for a younger classroom sit down and read a story. The teacher engages the kids because they're talking about it as if it's real. They've got emotion. What's going to happen on the next page? The big bad wolf is in grandma's house. And that when we talk to kids about anything that we want to help them understand, we need to bring some appropriate affect into the discussion. So this isn't about teaching them something that is just a point in history. This is about teaching them about something that's happened to our tribe. We're a tribal people. That's what we're bound together, and when things happen, and I would like to define that tribe as all of us who live on this small planet, but unfortunately we find smaller clusters to call our tribe as well, and divide the world into them and us. But I would certainly hope that the discussion that you'd have with your child about 9/11 would do anything you could to help them feel it with you as a sadness, and not in any way promote a sense of them and us, because that's what it's all about. That's what caused it. So that's not a short answer. I'm not great at short answers. Sorry.
explain this to their kids? Do they think they're going to lose their innocence?
Yeah, that's a good question. So are parents afraid of, in some way injuring their child's innocence by talking to them about the world around them? And I think that's probably some truth to that. And I think you never want to tell a child more than they're ready to hear. Whether that's about, man's violence against mankind, or whether it's about sexuality or anything that's somewhat complex. You've got to read your kid and read how much they're able to take in. And they'll let you know, because their eyes will glaze over, they'll look away, they'll tell you it's boring, they'll find something else. So listen to those cues. Allow yourself to listen to those. But other kids will come back and they'll want more information. And when kids want more information, your best bet is to be pretty open and pretty honest. But once again, you got to be careful about, from my perspective, you've got to be careful about conveying simplistic perceptions that do things like divide the world into the good people and the bad people. But I think kids, they see and feel so much. And if we don't create or offer them some sort of coherent narrative for what's going on, then we leave them just there with this kind of confused sense. And if we can provide them a little bit of a narrative that says, oh, okay, I feel this, and now I've got a little bit of a story that helps me understand it. Yeah, kids are served by that. We're all served by that, truth be known.
Are there, have you heard of parents who might, not, hide the kids from the news? A lot has been going on in Afghanistan over the last couple months. Are parents trying to preserve that innocence and, hide their children?
I think that is generally a good practice. Children don't need to be overwhelmed. I mean, we don't need to be overwhelmed by it. We live in a world that's very different. Our evolution has not caught up with technology, and we can just be bombarded with sadness and difficult realities that we have to figure out how to block, and that doesn't facilitate our growth in bearing witness to the pain and struggles of life. So being overwhelmed by stimuli, particularly painful and difficult stimuli, is problematic. It's problematic for us. It's particularly problematic for kids. Kids do not need to know more than what they need to know. Now, that said, if kids are in a culture where there's a lot going on that they're picking up on, you do need to help them make sense out of it. But I certainly would not recommend exposing them or thinking that, one of the things that we see parents do, they did it when I was a kid and they still do it, is the idea that you're going to teach people empathy. You're gonna say, well, look at these kids, look how they have it, and it's oftentimes done in a way of shaming you for not appreciating what you have. You complain, but look at these kids who are living in this war-torn country, or that doesn't work. Empathy is caught; it's not taught, and that's a quote from Mary Gordon. And so I think that as much as parents may think that their exposure to some of the hard realities may help their children develop a greater appreciation and empathy, it's probably not. That's not how empathy evolves. And it certainly can create anxiety for kids that they're not ready for. Exposing them to that any more than exposing them to, explicit sexual content. Why would you do either?
So when, the kids may have had enough, their eyes glaze over.
Yeah, they look away.
What should a parent do?
You should give them a hug and say, if you want to know more, let me know, sweetie. And move on. Move on with life. Go forward. Don't persist in putting more into a youngster's awareness than they're ready for. It just doesn't work. It's not helpful. So the more you're able to stay, even as you talk about these difficult things, you still want to stay very much connected. And connection is marked, Dan Hughes, who's actually a local, but world-renowned expert on attachment, talks about pace as that's playful, your interactions that are governed by playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And so those you hope you'll carry through in everything. Now, it may not be playful, be possibly playful as you talk about some sad reality, but as soon as you're done talking about it, it's okay to move back into all of those spheres. So, yeah, so you move on. You move on and let them process it. They may not talk about it for a week and may come back later and ask you about it. They may wake up the next morning, or when you're lying down next to them to tuck them in at night, they may mention it. So you let it be there.
Obviously, this is being taught in history classes when kids get a little bit older.
Yeah.
If a child is being exposed to it the first time there, and then go home and have questions, what do you suggest to parents in that situation?
Try to be honest. Try to be straightforward. Try to be, there are a few things that are more effective with kids than helping them make sense out of their world, but also connecting emotion with that. So they come home and they want to talk about it, and you talk about it. But once again, I encourage you not to talk about it as a cold fact, but to kind of tell the story a little bit as you do it that has some kind of emotion connected to it. The Maya Angelou quote, it's often quoted that, people will often forget anything their teacher taught them, but this is not verbatim her quote, but they sure remember how they felt in that person's presence. And so that idea that emotion gets encoded in a very powerful way within our memory. And so if you want to teach something in a meaningful way, tie a little emotion in with it.
Anything else you think I should know?
There's probably a lot we all should know. Kids they're one of the things I didn't mention before, but there's a Buddhist notion of the beginner's eyes, that the idea that when you walk down a street for the first time, and you see it more clearly than you do the 1000th time, because that first time you're looking at all the houses and you're noticing everything. When you walk down it, 100 times later, you're really not even paying attention to it. So kids oftentimes provide us this kind of crystalline perspective that's associated with what the Buddhists talk about as beginner's eyes. And so listen to your kids. They've got some important things to teach us. And we have important things to teach them, but don't think that they don't have things to teach